Welcome back to Coats and Conversation. I'm your host, Kendrique Coats, a therapist for athletes and couples in Illinois and Alabama. In today's conversation, I'll be speaking with Megan Harrington, a former collegiate gymnast and a former Illinois State University gymnastics coach. This was a great episode because in the beginning, we talk about Megan's experiences as a college athlete going through injury, but more importantly, the nuances of finding her own identity after sports. Further on in the conversation, we talk about athlete mental health and what it means to have a good and healthy team culture. Two of the things that stood out in this episode, Megan highlighted the importance of opening up space for athletes to be able to talk about their own struggles and mental health. And then the other piece that she mentioned is that coaching is much more than clocking in and clocking out. And I'm in agreement with both of those points, because if we do not give athletes the space to be a human, and if we just view athletes as robots or superhumans that never have any sort of issues going on in their life, are we truly coaching a whole athlete? And I don't think we are. I think when it comes to coaching, as Megan mentioned, we have to look at the whole athlete. What are they going through at home? What are their relationships like? How's school going for them? Is there anything that they want to talk about? Those things. And when we give athletes those sorts of healthy team culture environments and the ability to show themselves, but more importantly, to let them know that they're seen, heard, and understood, I do think you get a whole athlete who competes at the highest level. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did having it. Megan, I was thinking about how sports work, especially here in the United States, where many athletes start at such an early age and sometimes it becomes their whole identity. For you, thinking back on your journey, how do you think sports shaped you in your identity and who you are as a person today?
Yeah, I mean, both my parents were gymnasts, so they put me in the sport when I was just 2 years old. So it's kind of all I ever knew. And it was, I don't want to say the family business, but like my aunts and uncles were also gymnasts. So everyone in my family kind of associated with gymnastics. So it was kind of the natural path for me to go in. And I was taking classes, when I was in diapers. So
Hmm.
gymnastics very much started at a young age for me, and I fell in love with the gym. But like I said, it's kind of all I ever knew. So growing up, it definitely became a part of my identity and something that, I was proud to have be part of my identity because it was everything in my life surrounded around gymnastics. And going into, middle school and high school and not having a high school gymnastics team or anything like that, I kind of struggled in that sense because everyone knew me as Megan the gymnast because that was kind of all I did. I wasn't really involved in a lot of high school activities or other things like that. So I was, that gymnast girl, the one that used to flip in gym class and all that stuff. And so when I got to college, it was very much exciting for me to be, a student athlete and recognized as such. And so I embraced it even more at that age, being, finally recognized for everything that I was doing in the gym. And I loved, that recognition, being a student athlete, being a college gymnast, all of those things. And so up until I was 21 and graduated from college, that was my sole identity. I didn't know anything else. And so leaving, gymnastics behind, there's no such thing as professional gymnastics, and there's no like place to go after you graduate from college. Like that's kind of the end of the road. I struggled a lot with kind of figuring out who I was and what was going to be next for me because it was the first time in my life I wasn't Megan the gymnast. I was just Megan. And I had no idea what that meant or kind of where to turn or anything like that. And so it became kind of difficult in that sense because I had never, grappled with that question before, who I was without gymnastics. And
Hmm.
I think the benefit now is that I think a lot of universities are starting to recognize that that is becoming an issue for a lot of student athletes. And so they're starting to kind of put together, seminars and, panels of former student athletes talking about what life is like after their sport and kind of how to embrace, a new role or a new side of them. And so I think it's good that that conversation is, starting to happen. But back when I was an athlete, that wasn't a big conversation and we didn't have a lot of those resources yet. So it was a big turning point in my life trying to figure out who I was after
Hmm.
gymnastics.
You mentioned taking classes when you were in diapers, which is, as I mentioned at the beginning, in the United States, sports is sometimes everything for a lot of parents. Identity, sense of purpose, etc.
Mhm.
For you, I want you to highlight a little bit more. So when you from being an athlete and then transitioning into being a coach, what was that like for you? Because I hear a lot of athletes talk about, and you alluded to it a little bit, leaving the sport, it's like, oh my goodness, like who am I? What am I going to do? Where is my group at? Where are my people at? So what was it like for you transitioning from an athlete into becoming a coach?
Yeah, it was I don't think it was as difficult for me because I took some time off after I graduated from college and I wasn't initially going to pursue coaching. Like that wasn't kind of the natural path and what I wanted to do at the time. And so it was really hard leaving like gymnastics behind. And my fifth year in school, I took a fifth year because I was a double major and I had a few classes left to finish, but I was done with my eligibility. So I kind of volunteered with my team a little bit during that time. But it was really hard to walk into the gym and not be the person that was slipping and not be the person on the equipment. And it was a lot different being like the person that wasn't the athlete anymore. And so I took probably 3 or 4 years off where I completely did not set foot in a gymnastics gym like whatsoever. I
Wow.
couldn't do it. I couldn't handle not being the gymnast anymore. And so I took that time away to kind of figure out who I was. And by the time, those 3 years had passed and I did walk back into the gym, I was ready to embrace that coach role. Like it wasn't immediate that I turned in from gymnast to coach. Like that, I never would have been able to do that. It would have been way too difficult for me. And I think taking the time away and learning how to appreciate the sport in a different way helped a lot because I was ready to, fall in love with gymnastics all over again in a whole different way.
Hmm. You said you took 3 years off. I'm curious, were there or was there a time during that transition phase where you had any sort of frustration, even when maybe you saw people that you knew that still referred to you as Megan the gymnast? Did you ever have this sense of frustration, like, dang it, like, no, that's not me anymore?
Yeah. No, I still liked it. Like
Ah,
because I still wanted to be Megan the gymnast. That's the identity I wanted to have. It's just not the one I had anymore. And so when people still refer to me as Megan the gymnast, I'm like, "Ooh, I love that." Like, yeah, I still wish I was a gymnast. Like, and I would correct him and say I'm not, a gymnast anymore, but I can still be referred to as that gymnast girl because clearly I'm still around the sport. But um I would correct people, but I enjoyed still having that sense of recognition for the identity that I wished I still had.
hmm. I remember my transition from being an athlete to coach. And I know a lot for me, I dealt with just so many different things mentally. So as we transition into just mental health, I know it hasn't always been a big thing in conversations amongst collegiate spaces. So for you now being a coach, what are some of the ways that you create space for athletes to be seen, heard, and for them to have this reassurance that it's okay to talk about mental health?
Yeah, I think the benefit now is that it has become so widespread to openly talk about mental health that it's becoming a lot easier for people to hopefully, ask for help when they need it. And I know working in the collegiate space, it was very nice that we had a lot of resources on campus to help athletes with mental health. But I think the biggest thing as a coach is just creating that relationship with your athlete and creating that safe space to the point where if they are going through something, they feel comfortable talking to you about it and it might not even be that, I'm the person that can help them through that. I'm not a mental health trained professional. Like, I don't pretend to have that kind of background or education. But as long as an athlete feels comfortable coming to me and saying, "Hey, I'm dealing with this issue, and I trust you," then I, as the coach, can kind of tell them it's okay, to have these things, and half the people out there are going through mental health struggles. Like, you are not alone. And then here are the resources that I can give you that can kind of help you through this time. But if you don't create that safe space for an athlete to come to you and just let you know that they're struggling, then they might end up struggling in silence and not know, how to ask for help or what those resources might be. And so if you go into the gym every day and you're only focusing on gymnastics and that's it, and you go in and you coach and you leave, like, there's no way an athlete's going to come to you and say, I'm struggling with this. But if you go in and you ask them how their day is and how their classes are and, what's going on at home, how their parents are doing, all those things, like, you kind of start to create that relationship with them where they do feel comfortable talking to you about things outside of the sport. And then if there is an issue that does come up or they're struggling mentally, then hopefully that you've created enough of a safe space for them to come to you and tell you that.
Injuries typically takes a physical and mental toll. For you, I know you mentioned kind of, you're not necessarily a mental health licensed mental health provider, but how is for you as a coach? And I'm just thinking through how many athletes out there do go through injuries or are struggling mentally, but they're, I guess, maybe a little bit wired differently and want to sometimes internalize things. How do you approach athletes who you're seeing different changes with their demeanor and getting them to open up?
Yeah, and I think injuries in gymnastics are so prevalent. Like, it's hard when, you coach at the collegiate level because they've probably gone through this before. Like, it's very rare you're going to see someone go through an injury for the very first time at the collegiate level. And so they've kind of dealt with that a little bit already. And I feel like that kind of helps because they know what they need to do to get back on that competition floor and to contribute to the team in the best way that they can. But I think with, the mental health side of it, recognizing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and that during the time that they're out and they have this injury or something's going on, they're still part of the team and they still have a role. And I think that was something that, I stressed a lot as a collegiate coach is that even if you were hurt, you can come in there and you can maybe move mats if you're not, on crutches or something like that. Like, you can kind of help your teammates in that way. You can be the biggest cheerleader. You can stand by an event and kind of hype them up the best that they can. And sometimes they really need that. And that's just as important as being the person that's doing the routine. If you are there as their, cheerleader, really encouraging them, making sure that they feel, mentally and physically ready to do the routine. If you're doing that for them, then you are just as much a part of the team as the person doing the skill. And I think kind of reinforcing that with athletes and making sure that they still feel like they are seen, they are heard, they are part of the team, that helps a lot through any time that they have injuries.
So bringing in, your former athletic experiences, you navigating injuries, has that helped you show up for athletes now as a coach?
Yeah, I had one really bad instance when I was in college where I landed on my head and I was
Wow.
fine. Luckily, like, I started practicing again, and then my athletic trainer was like, "Wait, where's the clearance note from your doctor?" And I was like, "I need that, really?" And then it took forever to get that. And that was kind of hard just because I felt like I was ready to go. And like, we couldn't just get the clearance note to let me go. And it took forever and it drove me crazy sitting on the sidelines for that long. That I do understand what it's like to kind of be out and be so frustrated that you could be doing everything or you wish you could be doing everything. And there's just that one thing that's just stopping you. I think that was so hard for me to go through. And I remember what that was like. So I understand the frustrations and just those feelings of helplessness that, athletes have when they're injured, because that was exactly how I felt in that moment.
You mentioned earlier about culture. And I think maybe in our previous call, we've talked about just coaching and culture. So trust and team culture are essential pieces to coaching. Based on your experiences, what does a healthy and connected sports culture look like in gymnastics?
Yeah, I think I've been through years as a coach that have a really great culture on the team, and I've been through years where there's not a great culture on the team. And so I've kind of seen the benefits that it has, when everyone on the team is, on the same page and getting along and kind of have that same goal in mind. It is light years different, in terms of their athletic success, because they are doing it for the team. They are doing it for that shared goal, and they all want it for each other. And so in gymnastics, I think the biggest thing is like there's 6 athletes that compete on each event, and we call it a lineup. And so you have 20, 22 athletes on the team. There's only 6 that are getting to compete that event. And so
Mm.
it gets to be really difficult when, you have 10, 12 athletes who can all do a great routine, and the coaches have to select 6, and when you have a good team culture and everyone's on the same page and wants it, for the team, those people that don't get selected are so happy for their teammates that they got selected, and they internalize that, and they're like, all right, I'm going to work my butt off next week so I'm one of those spots. But when you have, a team culture that's a little more selfish and they're not looking out for the team, they kind of only want it for themselves, then they start, trash talking like, how come she got to compete and I didn't? And it's not a shared common goal anymore. It's just, everyone for themselves. And that creates a lot of animosity within the athletes, within the coaching staff, everything. And so I think when you do a lot of, team building at the beginning of the year and make sure, all the teammates are kind of being supportive of each other and want that same goal and want what's best for each other, then they kind of have that first mentality where if they don't get selected, they're ready to work their butt off and, do it for themselves and make the team that much better.
Mm.
And I love working with teams that have kind of that type of team culture and that type of camaraderie. And it's really difficult, if you don't start that off at the beginning of the year, to go in and try to change it halfway through. So you have to go in at the very beginning when school starts in August and just start off with that awesome team culture and everyone on the same page, or it's not going to be as successful of a year as everyone hopes it is.
I could imagine just kind of what kind of culture, given, I mean, sounds like gymnastics, super competitive. We talk sometimes, at least in my experiences, about how culture, positive or negative, can influence athletes, but I don't know if we necessarily talk enough about how it actually impacts other coaches. So for you, in those experiences where you were in a team culture that weren't as positive, what kind of toll did it take on you and how you could show up for the other athletes?
Yeah, it's really hard, not just for like taking it personally, because now the athletes kind of, are talking in the corner like, oh, I don't trust her. She's not making the right decision. It's really difficult because you are, as a coach, you're always doing what you think is best for the team. You're always doing what you think is best for the athletes. And then suddenly you kind of have these people start to doubt you. That's difficult. And then it's also hard because, you do what you think is best, and you put these athletes in this situation where you feel like they're going to succeed, and then suddenly some people on the team are saying they don't think that they are, and then that kind of breaks your heart for the person that has that opportunity, because now they're starting to second guess themselves, and it's just kind of creates this big spiral of negativity and uncertainty when you don't have that team culture.
So given that culture is such a vital role in creating trust, what are some things that you wish coaches would implement more to be able to create those type of environments where assistant coaches, athletes are having a good time and they're not having to worry about whether or not they can trust their coach?
hmm The biggest thing I think to creating a great team culture is to start with open communication. And that's, I mean, between athletes and athletes, coaches and athletes, coaches and coaches, like everyone has to be on the same page in order to do that. And having a floor open where people can voice their opinions and kind of maybe bounce ideas off of one another and talk about those kind of things is paramount to success. And the minute, I have these feelings and I feel like I can't share them, suddenly there's no trust between me and the other coach that I feel like I can't talk to. Or if there's an athlete who's, having a rough time, going back to our previous conversation and saying like they are having a rough time with X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's school, maybe it's something with family life, and they don't feel like there's an open floor of communication between them and the coaches, then that creates, other issues too. So just coming in and just saying like, hey, this is open. There's no judgment here. If you have feelings, let's share them, let's get them out on the floor, and let's address those situations, whatever it may be, and kind of create that open communication I feel like the greatest thing that coaches can do from the get-go.
I'm always surprised, just even, some of my previous experiences being in toxic cultures within sports and even just in corporate life. And it was always funny to me where we would have these toxic cultures, and then the leaders in those positions were upset that their athletes weren't doing this or assistant coaches weren't doing this. And it blows my mind because it's like, well, from the top, that we don't have a solid foundation that what you mentioned, communication, but more importantly, people don't feel safe in this environment. um, which is going into my other thought. College athletics is changing. You've got NIL, you've got the transfer portal, and many coaches do talk about how different things are and how they can create these type of cultures. So from your experience and from your perspective, how can gymnastics continue to grow and evolve while still protecting the integrity of the sport?
Hmm. Wow, there are so many things happening right now in the realm of collegiate sports and collegiate gymnastics. Obviously, what I know the most about, but with the NIL, the transfer portal, the house settlement, colleges opting in, there's a ton of different changes that are coming our way. And the big ones for gymnastics are that it's no longer going to be a head count sport. So instead of having 12 full scholarships, we can split those up and we can have up to 20 full scholarships. If the school only has the budget for 12, they can still split them up. You can give partials here and there. It used to be all or nothing. And so now that's a big thing that, college coaches are going to have to, try to navigate. And then roster limits as well. Only having 20 athletes on a roster. I think a lot of universities usually carry around 20 anyway, but there's some out there that carried upwards of 30 or 35 people. And so they're really going to have to figure out, how to navigate that moving forward. So there's a lot of changes, and I'm very interested to see kind of how things shake up in the next couple of years. But in terms of the growth of the sport and keeping gymnastics something that's interesting. Gymnastics is a collegiate sport that's on the rise. It is getting more and more viewership every single year. The last couple of years of the NCAA championship were the most viewed in history, and I feel like gymnastics is becoming more of one of those sports that people continue to want to watch on TV. They want to go catch a meet. We always used to say that once you go to one gymnastics meet, you will definitely be back because they are that exciting and that fun to watch. So I think it's really just about protecting that same product that we are giving to the community, the same kind of level of excitement. And I don't think that too much of the changes that are happening from a logistics side on the NCAA are going to change the overall product that is collegiate gymnastics. I think it's becoming more exciting. I think more athletes, young athletes, are trying gymnastics. I think it's a growing sport, and it's not just something that people are watching every 4 years at the Olympics anymore. It is something that people are continually watching year round because we have that opportunity through, collegiate sports.
Do you think it has any, and maybe I'm just kind of thinking about this. I know we don't have like a crystal ball and we can't, see what the future holds, but do you think this impacts um, some middle school, high school athletes out there that are involved in gymnastics? Do you think this impacts their ability to want to continue to maybe pursue collegiate gymnastics because of some of these changes and maybe how much more competitive it's getting?
Yeah, I definitely feel like it is getting more competitive, but I feel like that's making it more exciting. And I hope that it means that more people are wanting to continue. We get, as a former recruiting coordinator, I would get emails all the time from athletes who are just wanting an opportunity, wanting a spot. And unfortunately, there's not enough programs out there. There's not enough opportunities that I'm turning down athletes who maybe 5, 10 years ago would have gotten a spot. And now, the talent level is getting higher and higher. And it is, probably becoming a little more challenging to compete at the collegiate level. But I also think that that just shows that there's a demand for more programs. And I know that there is a committee, the Collegiate Gymnastics Growth Initiative, who works with, universities and trying to tell them the benefits of adding gymnastics as a sport. And so I think that or I guess I should say, I hope that more opportunities are going to come. I think with the House settlement and everything going on and kind of how things are changing in terms of financial stability on the university level, I think it might be a little more difficult to add sports. I've seen more and more universities take them away, unfortunately. And I think that's kind of a negative effect of everything going on because we want more opportunities for all athletes across all sports. And the more programs that add and kind of provide those opportunities, the better it will be for youth sports in general and youth gymnastics.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I'll also add, one of the things that I hope young athletes don't lose sight of is how beneficial sports can be just for life. I know a lot of athletes out there put themselves in positions where physically they're in positions where they're putting their bodies in harm's way to try to work for the scholarship, and they can sometimes, from my experiences seeing athletes, where they'll go the extra mile but their mental health is jeopardized. I hope that athletes and parents out there can understand that sports is important at the younger levels because they have so many benefits to teaching us about life. And yeah, there are a lot of things that are changing on the NCAA level. However, most athletes aren't going to compete at that level. I mean, the percentage is so small. So I say all of that to say that, yeah, the changes are coming, but I hope athletes continue to participate and not let that be a barrier to them getting a good experience and getting life lessons from some of the sports that they play.
I feel like there's so many things that I learned that have shaped me as a person, like you mentioned, life lessons that, in terms of dedication, time management, all of those things that kind of shaped me into being a well rounded human being. I got that from gymnastics. Like my parents told me if I wasn't getting good grades, I couldn't go to the gym. So, of course, I had to manage those two things. And it taught me to, prioritize school and prioritize, that time management in order so that I could go to the gym and do the thing that I love to do. So I think there are so many things or so many qualities I have now that stemmed from gymnastics and being a youth athlete. And I think that's so important. And then on top of that, I tell young parents all the time to put your kids in gymnastics because even if they don't stick with it beyond a year or two, gymnastics teaches you so much in terms of hand-eye coordination, balance, like all of those things that, might not even translate to being a gymnast long term, but might translate to another sport that they want to try, or another activity that they might want to do in life. I think gymnastics kind of teaches a lot of those things. And so those little mommy and me classes or those parent taught classes, I tell parents to put their kids in that all the time, regardless of whether or not they're going to be a gymnast for more than a year.
I love that. And it's just like shows how dedicated you are to the sport, how dedicated you are to continue to grow the sport. Throughout our conversation, I can tell that you are one who wants to pour into athletes, and that's not always the case for some coaches out there. Sometimes it can be, coaches can be in a position where it's just clock in and clock out, whereas other coaches are truly trying to pour into not only the athletes that they're working with, but also to pour into the sport that meant that thousands, maybe millions of athletes are involved with. So transitioning, thinking through everything that we've talked about, there might be a young athlete out there who's interested in pursuing gymnastics and maybe one day pursuing coaching like yourself. What's one thing you would want them to walk away from this conversation?
I think with coaching specifically, like you just said, it's not something that you just clock in, clock out. That's it. Like you are shaping these young people's futures. And so it's a big responsibility to want to be a coach for gymnastics or for any sport because you are not only teaching them the fundamentals of the sport, you're teaching them the fundamentals of life and how to be a good person and kind of life lessons like that. And I think it's a huge responsibility to be a coach. And with that being said, I think we as people are all constantly learning. We're learning from the people around us. And as a young athlete, you're learning from your coaches, whether that's, good coaching styles or bad coaching styles. And you can take that to heart and realize, what this coach did that really stuck with you and moved you and made you a better person. And maybe you want to take that to your future athletes. Or on the flip side, you might have had a coach that gave you a really bad experience and this is how they treated you. And now you know as a coach that you never want to treat your athletes like that, or you never want to make them feel like that. And so learning from the people around us and the things that they do or the things that they don't do, you can take that with you and continue to evolve who you are as a person and who you are as a coach and your coaching style. And I don't feel like any of us ever stop learning from the people around us. And no matter what, you will be learning until you're 80. So you might as well kind of take that to heart and realize the things that, or the qualities people have that you want to possess in your life as a person or as a coach.
That's a powerful message. And I just want to thank you for pouring into young athletes. I think that as we evolve, as the sports evolve, there are athletes that are needing coaches like yourself to pour into them and actually see them as a human versus athlete first. And everything that you've talked about today, I can tell that you're truly pouring into the human to make a better athlete. And I think that is a missing ingredient a lot of times in coaching. So I want to thank you for coming on to Coats and Conversation and sharing the importance of building trust and having a team culture where athletes can speak up about mental health while also getting the life skills that they need.
Thank you so much
Yep.
for having me. I loved it.
If you're listening to Coats and Conversation on YouTube or any podcasting platform, be sure to like and subscribe. Drop a comment. What was your favorite part about today's conversation?